a 95-year-old woman, was going to give one of Mexico's most lethal cartels a lesson they would never forget in the peaceful Texas borderlands. Until the day the Los Espectros cartel made the catastrophic error of threatening to seize her farm, Eleanor Ellie Stewart appeared to be just another old farmer, caring for her land a few miles from the Mexican border. These thieves were unaware that this kind-looking grandma had previously served as one of America's most accomplished intelligence officers, having completed more than 100 missions successfully during World War II. Ellie made 3 phone calls that would alter everything when the cartel's intimidation reached a breaking point. Under the leadership of the infamous Victor El Lobo Mendez, the Los Espectros believed they had an easy target. Rather, they encountered a concerted effort by more than 60 former federal officers and intelligence operatives, both male and female, whose lives and careers Ellie had influenced in Europe and Asia decades prior. An incredible tale of bravery, justice, and the strength of enduring allegiances would emerge from what started as a day of threats and intimidation, proving that some abilities never go out of style and that the most deadly enemy isn't usually the most obvious. What started out as a straightforward land grab would turn into one of the most complex operations the border region had ever witnessed. This is the tale of a 95-year-old former intelligence officer who saved not just her farm, but also a whole town by taking on one of Mexico's most deadly gangs. A brief silence before we go on. Where on earth are you watching from? Please? Make sure to hit subscribe if you're liking these stories, as tomorrow's episode is going to be incredible. As Eleanor Stewart crossed her property line, her aging hands grazing the wheat stalks that extended beyond the horizon, the rising sun cast long shadows across her farm. She was 95 years old, and her steps were deliberate but measured, each one planned with the accuracy of someone who had lived a lifetime paying attention to their surroundings. The distant border fence served as a sharp reminder of the invisible. After finishing her morning inspection and lining up between 2 worlds, Ellie made her way to her truck, an ancient Ford that had seen better days but still functioned flawlessly. She glimpsed William's picture through her farmhouse's kitchen window, her late husband in his CIA outfit, his smile immortalized in a snapshot. Every bump and turn in the road was as familiar to her as the lines on her aged hands as they drove into Valle Vista. First Isabella's diner, then the general store, then the church, and lastly the gas station, where Mike's antiquated pump still needed to be operated by hand. "Good morning, Mrs. Stewart." As she drew up, Tommy, the young attendant, yelled out. In contrast to his customary warm greeting, his smile today appeared forced. "Tommy, is everything okay?" Observing the strain in his shoulders, Ellie inquired. "Sure, ma'am, simply." He looked around, then went on. "Earlier, some men inquired about you. People in black SUVs with tinted windows expressed interest in purchasing real estate in the region." Ellie's face remained unchanged, but her intellect efficiently and skillfully cataloged the information. "What did you tell them? And did they now? That your farm wasn't for sale, even if you've owned it for decades?" Tommy moved apprehensively. That response didn't sit well with them. The mood was just as tight inside the general store. When Ellie walked in, Martha, who had been the owner for 30 years, hardly raised her head. As the elderly woman entered, 2 men in pricey suits stood behind the counter, their focus going to her. "Stewart," Mrs. One of them moved forward, his smile stopping short of his eyes when his Mexican accent identified him. "My name is Jorge Vega. I've been wanting to talk to you with my colleagues." Ellie moved leisurely as she picked up her belongings. "Mr. Vega, I don't think we have anything to talk about." Instead, he stepped forward, his partner at his sides. "A development company that we represent is looking at sites along the border. We are particularly interested in your farm." "I don't sell my farm." Decades of authority were evident in Ellie's voice. Jorge gritted his teeth. "Maybe we could talk about this over coffee. Your employer, our employer, is ready to be extremely giving." Ellie turned and stared at him steadily. "Is Victor Mendez there? El Lobo?" The store's temperature appeared to decline. Martha took cover behind her. Tommy, who had followed Ellie in, stepped back from the counter. Jorge's kind manner disappeared. Ellie calmly answered, "You seem naive for a cartel enforcer, and you seem well-informed for a simple farmer, Mrs. Stewart." Did El Lobo really believe that I wouldn't recognize the person inquiring about my property? Jorge gestured to block the second man's hand from going to his jacket. Oh, Mrs. Stewart, this could have been easy. It gets complicated now. No, while counting out exact change. Ellie set her belongings on the counter. It gets intriguing now. She passed them. She straightened her back with her speed. Jorge called after her as she arrived at her pickup. El Lobo doesn't accept no, elderly lady. Consider your position carefully. As the men climbed into their black SUV, Ellie turned on her engine and observed them in her rearview mirror. They refused to pursue her. Not quite yet. They would report to their employer first. Tell him about the old woman who knew things she shouldn't have known and wasn't scared. Ellie immediately headed to her study after returning to her farm. There was a safe behind William's picture, with the same combination as 20 years before. 3 phones, each with a direct line to someone she hadn't spoken to in decades, were inside. Individuals who owed her their freedom, their jobs, and their lives. Her fingers hesitating over the keypad, she picked up the first phone. An important lesson about appearances, preconceptions, and the dangers of underestimating someone based only on their age was about to be imparted to the Los Espectros cartel. Ellie Stewart started making plans as the sun sank over her farm. She hadn't trained generations of operatives and survived innumerable missions to let some cartel goons to threaten her in her own house. Her former analyst, Ruth Henderson, would receive the first call. The third was to Frank Thompson, the agent she had rescued in Berlin. Well, even El Lobo, with all his strength and violence, would be powerless to halt what would happen after the third call. Ellie Stewart had no plans to lose the struggle for Valle Vista, which was about to start. As the final rays of sunlight sent amber and gold hues across Valle Vista's sky, Ruth Henderson arrived. The woman who emerged moved with the assured accuracy of someone who had spent decades assessing risks and figuring out odds, even though her silver Mercedes didn't seem appropriate on the dusty farm road. She was 20 years Ellie's junior at 75, but their relationship had been forged in the furnace of Cold War operations that had never been documented in any official document. You know, Ruth continued, embracing her longtime buddy, I never thought that a Mexican drug cartel would be involved in our reunion after all these years. Ellie took her inside, where her dining room table was already covered with maps of Valle Vista and the border area. Ruth, they're more than just drug dealers now. Los Espectros has changed over time. Here, they are attempting to set up long-term infrastructure, with her analyst's mind already working through potentialities and patterns. Ruth scrutinized the maps. Your farm is situated at a crucial intersection. They could keep an eye on both civilian traffic and border patrol movements from this location. But why make such a bold move? Ellie responded, citing recent indicators of cartel activities, because Victor Mendez is becoming more brazen. Taking advantage of border stations that are understaffed, the Los Espectros have started moving north. They believe that purchasing an elderly woman's land is simple. The third black SUV of the hour passed gently through the window. Ruth saw, but did not respond. They have already begun to observe. Monitoring by professionals. Street thugs are not what these are. No, Ellie concurred. They're worse. These men are ambitious and believe they are above the law. She retrieved an old file from her cabinet. Remind you of someone. Ruth studied the yellowed snapshot, her eyes narrowing. 1944 in Berlin. An OSS operative disproved the Wehrmacht officer's belief that he was unbeatable. Ellie nodded to Colonel Muller. Even after all these years, the memories of the operation are still vivid. He possessed the same blind spots and conceit. Such men never anticipate being outwitted by those they view as inferior. More cars gathered at the deserted petrol station 2 miles down the road as they conversed. Confident in their display of might, the Los Espectros were establishing their first local base of operations. Ruth checked her encrypted phone and said, by morning, Frank Thompson will be here. Former operators who have been longing for a good cause are among his buddies. And the others, reacting just as you had anticipated. So far, 20 have been confirmed. Every veteran of the operations you oversaw or assisted with. Ellie, the network is still going strong. The kind of loyalty never wanes. They were interrupted by a knock on the door. The owner of the diner, Isabella Ruiz, stood there looking anxious. "They're here in town, Mrs. Stewart. At least 30 of them are staying at the motel and inquiring about you and your territory." Noting the speed at which the community was picking sides, Ellie thanked her for the warning. After Isabella left, she explained to Ruth that they would begin with intimidation. Threats, property damage, and attempts to keep us out of the town. Ruth acknowledged that it was standard cartel playbook. However, they have never interacted with the author of the counterintelligence operations book. The following few hours were devoted to meticulous preparation. They were able to connect with other members of their previous network using Ruth's laptop. Former military experts, intelligence analysts, and retired CIA agents who had never forgotten their debt to Eleanor Stewart. The presence of the cartel became increasingly apparent as night settled completely over Valle Vista. It became evident that resistance would be expensive as black SUVs patrolled the outskirts. Motorcycles screamed through the streets, and guys in pricey shirts and shoddy suits started to show up in local establishments. They're traveling more quickly than anticipated. Ruth watched as a second procession of cars drove by. "Mendez has to have a personal stake in this endeavor." Ellie answered, "Good," with the same grit in her voice that had led innumerable operations decades before. His vulnerability increases as he devotes more resources. "Do you recall Santiago?" Ruth grinned a little. "You were turned in the operation. The whole security force of a drug lord is working against him." "Ellie, that was 30 years ago. The tenets remain unchanged. Men like Mendez established their empires on money and fear. Take those away," she said, pointing to the maps that already showed their first counter-moves. One of their secure channels received a message. A group of former special operators who had crossed into Texas with Frank Thompson seized the opportunity to assist the renowned Eleanor Stewart. "Isn't it just getting started?" Ruth recognized the expression in her old friend's eyes and asked. Ellie reprimanded her and went to the window to observe another cartel car drive by. It began when they believed that an elderly woman's farm would be a simple target. "All we're doing now is establishing the parameters of their education." The silence outside Valley Vista was the manufactured silence of a town holding its breath. With the delicacy of predators demarcating their territory, the Los Espectros had made their initial moves. They were unaware that they had entered a web that had been woven for decades by a lady who had dedicated her life to using the advantages of her adversaries against them. Ruth kept an eye on cartel activity while Ellie made coffee in her kitchen. They would have to be alert for what was about to happen. The destiny of her farm and the town as a whole would be decided in the coming days. For El Lobo and his guys, the hunt was simple. They were going to discover the distinction between thugs with firearms and professionals with a purpose, between experience and age, and between terror and strategy. Ruth pointed to the location of another cartel truck on their map and said, "They'll make their first real move soon. Something to show the town they mean business, most likely tonight." Ellie said, "Let them," her composure concealing a mind that was already 3 steps ahead. Their operations, hierarchy, and weaknesses are revealed by every action. It will be too late by the time they recognize their error. 2 very different forces readied themselves for the impending battle as the night grew darker over Valle Vista. While one was based on decades of experience and unwavering dedication, the other was based on violence and intimidation. For the Los Espectros, it appeared to be a straightforward land grab. Rather, they had unintentionally discovered a masterclass in intelligence operations. Without an instructor, they had drastically underestimated. It took us a long time to prepare and tell this story, so please subscribe to our channel if you find it entertaining. It is really important to us. Let's get back to the narrative. Like Elliot said, the attack happened around midnight. Her front gate was approached by 3 black SUVs, their headlights piercing the night. The Los Espectros' customary warning to anyone who disobeyed their demands was the appearance of men brandishing rudimentary explosive devices and gasoline cans. They were surprised to see the silent person on the barn roof, monitoring them via military-grade night vision goggles. An hour prior, Frank Thompson had arrived, with his group of former operators already positioned throughout the land. He moved with the same accuracy that had made him one of the most successful field agents in CIA's history, and he was 72 years old. Whispering into his radio, he said, 6 tangos at the gate. Amateur hour, standard cartel intimidation setup. The cartel men moved cockily and leisurely as they cut the chain on Ellie's gate, burning down a barn, leaving some bombs as calling cards, and making their stance obvious were all things they had done countless of times before. The floodlights on the farm came alive, illuminating the first man as he made his way to the barn. "Gentlemen, good evening." Ellie's voice reverberated across her property. Standing on her doorstep with Ruth at her side, the two women exuded a composure that comes from decades of dealing with more serious dangers. "I think you're intruding." For a time, the cartel men froze. The leader then got back up and drew his weapon. "Old woman, you ought to have accepted the offer. We now take the difficult route." Explaining to El Lobo how you lost 6 soldiers in a straightforward intimidation job would be the hard way, Ellie said. The sound of several guns being prepped in the surrounding darkness interrupted the leader's laughter. Hours before, Frank's men had them surrounded, their positions meticulously considered and set up. With his weapon flitting between unseen targets, the leader demanded, "What is this?" "This is the start of your education," Ellie said bluntly. "Get your soldiers and leave. Inform El Lobo that he should not waste his time on my farm." Violence hovered in the air like a paused breath for a moment. Bravado therefore lost out to survival instinct. As their SUVs sped out, the cartel guys backed off, their exit accompanied by gravel spray and curses. Frank said as he joined Ellie on the porch, "They'll be back. Better preparation with more personnel." Ellie said, "Of course they will, and we'll be prepared. However, the real game starts when they report to their supervisors first." Ruth had been listening to local radio frequencies inside the main house. 3 cartel vehicles have been stopped just outside of town by Sheriff Foster. At the former Miller site, they are attempting to set up a staging area. The Miller property had long since been abandoned, making it the ideal site for border traffic surveillance. Ellie looked at the property's location on their maps and saw the bigger picture take shape. A perimeter is being established. The farm is only one aspect of their strategy. The Los Espectros were making an impression on the town. There had already been a visit to Isabella's diner, a polite warning that some patrons might no longer be welcome. Regular deliveries to the general store were delayed, and the pricing at the gas station had unexpectedly increased. Michael Foster, the sheriff, was losing the struggle. He couldn't be everywhere at once because he only had 3 subordinates and little money. The cartel was aware of this and took advantage of his overworked workforce. Ellie, who was watching another patrol car drive by her property, said, "Michael is a good man. However, he is operating under rules that the cartel disregards." Throughout the site, Frank's team had set up observation points. They were undetectable but effective. These men had served in Iraq, Afghanistan, and innumerable other combat zones. They were not impressed by cartel thugs. As dawn drew near, the sky was painted in gold and purple hues. Something had been started by what had happened that night. This challenge to power would require a response from the Los Espectros. It was required by their reputation. Ruth said they're monitoring encrypted communications and calling in reinforcements. Tonight, at least 20 more guys will cross the border. Expert, not simply street muscle, hitmen. Unsurprised, Ellie nodded. As well as our workers. During the night, 8 more people showed up, including former Special Forces, CIA, and even a few of FBI analysts who had memories of Hamburg. One of Ellie's most intricate operations had been the one in Hamburg, an international operation that had stopped a terrorist strike while concealing any evidence of American assistance. The woman who made difficult operations successful was never forgotten by the analysts who had worked that case. A vehicle with the insignia of a nearby construction company came into Ellie's driveway. Materials were being delivered by the driver, a former Navy SEAL. They would require for the subsequent stage. It was soon to become clear to the Los Espectros that capturing territory required more than simply threats and firearms. Ellie reviewed their intelligence and said, "They'll target the town first. Make an effort to keep us apart. Turn the populace against us. Typical cartel strategies. Instill dread, provide safety, and exert authority." As a result of decades of missions, Frank checked his armaments. Already, the town is picking sides. Isabella's. This morning, boys saw their surveillance squads, told us about everything rather than them. Ellie had prepared for this portion. This is the time when dread has the power to either strengthen or destroy a community. The cartel had no idea that Valle Vista was going to turn into a battlefield. Ruth, Ellie resorted to her longtime buddy and called in the backup crew. We need to show El Lobo what he's truly up against. 2 troops readied themselves for the next stage of their battle as the sun rose completely ABO. Valle Vista. Ellie's crew would counter with something different from the Los Espectros' well-known tactics of violence, intimidation, and raw force. Something the cartel was ill-prepared to combat, as Ellie's network had been preparing something far more lethal than firearms and explosives while El Lobo's men had been planning their reaction all night. They were establishing a network of community opposition, surveillance, and intelligence that would work against the cartel's own strategies. Only one side fully comprehended the magnitude of the conflict they were engaged in, and the actual battle for Valle Vista was about to start. Mendez, Victor El Lobo, sat outside Valle Vista in his armored SUV, looking out the tinted windows of the town. This operation was unique just because of his presence. Los Espectros' boss rarely took problems personally, but he had taken notice of the men's report of the unsuccessful intimidation effort last night. The elderly woman was becoming more problematic than anticipated. With the quiet menace that had given him his moniker, he demanded, "Tell me again." The team leader shifted uneasily in his chair, taking in every detail. They were waiting, but we came as instructed. Expert operators and top-notch military hardware. The elderly woman was aware of our approach. The only indication of El Lobo's annoyance was the drumming of his fingers against his armrest. He had turned Los Espectros from a small smuggling enterprise into one of Mexico's most feared cartels in just 5 years. He hadn't succeeded by putting up with failure. "Learn everything you can about Eleanor Stewart," he said. "Everywhere she goes, she speaks with everyone. Why a farmer has military contractors guarding her property is what I want to know." The cartel's reaction to yesterday night's humiliation was already evident in the town. Windows in Isabella's diner were broken. The gas station supply truck was just outside town limits before morning. Minor alerts that became more serious. While his deputies gathered statements, Sheriff Foster stood in Isabella's diner, taking pictures of the damage. He called Ellie to report the 3rd incident of the morning. "They have a message to convey." Ellie clarified that they were following a pattern, examining the map on which Ruth was noting every incident, establishing a control corridor, and identifying important locations within the town. Frank's team saw cartel cars set up checkpoints on major highways from the covert observation posts they had set up in the church tower. There were no formal roadblocks, just carefully placed cars and guys standing around with visible weapons, observing everybody came and went. Ruth noticed that they were examining security footage to map the town's routine. Ellie nodded, recognizing strategies she had already seen in past arguments, learning patterns, and detecting pressure and points. Next, they will begin hiring, provide jobs for young men, defend enterprises, and establish dependents. More cartel members entered Valle Vista during the morning. They arrived in small groups and appeared to be regular tourists until you saw the military accuracy of their movements and the guns hidden under their coats. These were skilled combatants, veterans of Mexico's drug battles. And El Lobo wasn't just sending thugs. Frank said that his staff had tracked every arrival and had seen 40 new faces since morning. The old warehouse, the defunct motel, and the Route 9 gas station are the 3 sites where they are establishing command headquarters. Ellie examined the positions, observing the underlying strategy. Any move against one position can be countered from the other 2, forming a triangle of control. However, Ellie's network was carrying out their own plans as the cartel concentrated on force displays. Ruth's experts had set up monitoring on cartel movements by tapping into local security cameras. In order to track the cartel's activities, former intelligence operatives pretended to be tourists or visitors who were just passing through the area. Through a network of ostensibly innocent talks, Martha discreetly recorded which companies cartel members visited at the general store. In ways that were difficult for the cartel to match, the community was learning to observe, record, and oppose. El Lobo entered Isabella's around midday to make his first public debut. His presence demanded attention, as if he owned it. Tall, smartly dressed, and exuding the self-assurance of a guy used to being feared. He gave Isabella a pleasant greeting, Mrs. Ruiz, as though he hadn't caused her damaged windows. "I apologize for this regrettable event. Permit my men to assist with cleanup. Think of it as a courtesy." Ellie's staff had forewarned Isabella, and she did her part flawlessly. Although the community is already providing assistance, that is really nice. Here, we look after our own. El Lobo's eyes hardened, but his smile remained unwavering. He could see the villagers repairing the damage together through the windows of the diner. Their solidarity, an implicit challenge to his power. He agreed with ease that community is vital, but times are changing. These days, small towns need to be protected. For a fair arrangement, my company may offer that protection. Isabella answered steadily. "We already have protection. Sheriff Foster, the people that care about Valle Vista and our community." For a moment, El Lobo's jaw tightened at the implied rejection. He left more cash than was necessary for his unfinished coffee on the counter. "Mrs. Ruiz, consider my proposition. Valle Vista will undergo a transformation. Whether you change is the only question. Take it with you or fall behind." Ellie's people observed El Lobo's tour of the town from several vantage points, noting his alternating charm and subliminal threats. He was meticulously constructing his web, determining which companies would be vulnerable to pressure and which could require additional persuasion. "He's good," Ruth said, looking over the surveillance. "This isn't his first takeover, professional." Ellie said no, but it will be his final one. Frank was getting his crew ready for night operations when she turned to face him. "Let's begin Phase 2 by demonstrating to El Lobo what he has truly entered." The cartel's presence became increasingly apparent as dusk drew near. As more cars pulled up and more men positioned themselves throughout the town. They were assuming control and ensuring that everyone in Valle Vista was aware of the new system of authority. They were unaware that every action they took and every stance they took was being tracked, examined, and taken into account for a plan that had been developed over many years. As the sun sank over her property, Ellie reflected on past operations and adversaries who had believed they were unbeatable. Observing the concern in her friend's eyes, she informed Ruth that things would become worse before they got better. El Lobo is refusing to accept. Refusal. Until he provokes a confrontation, he will escalate. Knowing the plan, Ruth answered, "That's what we're counting on." Because Ellie's network was planning something much more destructive while the cartel concentrated on taking over the town. They were developing a case that would disintegrate Los Espectros as a whole in addition to destroying their Valle Vista business. Since El Lobo hadn't gained his reputation by showing mercy or patience, the true question was whether the community could handle what was about to happen. His next move would put Valle Vista's determination to the test. The peaceful community of Valle Vista was rocked by the Los Espectros' coordinated attacks around 2 in the morning. The general store, Isabella's diner, and 3 other establishments that had rejected El Lobo's offer of protection were the first to catch fire. Sheriff Foster's deputies rushed to respond as sirens sounded throughout the night. Speaking via a satellite phone, El Lobo's local commander, Ramon Ortiz, oversaw the operation from his black SUV. He reported that the message was being delivered. "By morning, the town will comprehend." Ortiz was unaware that the equipment Frank's crew had planted hours before was recording everything he said. Ellie and Ruth kept an eye on the cartel's communications from their farmhouse command center, tracing their command structure in real time. Ruth pointed to her laptop and said, "They're using military-grade encryption, but they're still following cartel protocols. Repetitive and predictable." Over their encrypted radio, Sheriff Foster's voice crackled. "At the general store, we have injured people." While attempting to salvage her inventory, Martha suffered a serious tumble. The level of these bastards is rising too quickly. Even though her community was in disarray, Ellie's voice stayed calm. "Get everyone to the church, Michael. Father O'Connor is anticipating their arrival. Medical assistance is on standby." Hours before, the chapel had been set up, packed with supplies and manned by 2 former combat doctors who were pretending to be tourists. This was a component of Ellie's plan to defend the neighborhood throughout the conflict in addition to opposing the cartel. They were able to observe Ortiz's troops moving through town with military accuracy thanks to their surveillance network. These were no typical goons from cartels. They were skilled combatants carrying out a well-thought-out strategy to destroy the town's morale. Frank reported from his observation point that 4 additional squads were approaching from the south. To ensure that everyone witnesses what happens to those who resist, they are making their way to the residential neighborhoods. Residents of Valle Vista, however, weren't responding as anticipated. They were coming out to support their neighbors rather than hiding in their houses. Water buckets were passed by a human chain to put out the diner's fire. Martha's family received assistance from others in salvaging what they could from the general store. Ruth noted the growing dissatisfaction in the cartel's communications and said, "This isn't going according to their plan." Instead of togetherness, they anticipated terror. Ellie grinned a little as she recalled previous missions in which the strength of community triumphed over force. Only when individuals feel alone does fear work. Valle Vista is no longer isolated. The cartel reacted quickly and viciously. In order to scatter the spontaneous firefighting operations, Ortiz sent armed squads to break up the civilian replies. However, every time they dispersed one organization, another one emerged in its place. When Ortiz's men insisted that he order the locals back to their homes, Sheriff Foster was forced to make an impossible decision. His deputies were subject to legal restrictions, outnumbered and outgunned. Ortiz told him icily, "This isn't a police matter anymore. We'll consider you a member of the resistance if you don't stand down." Ellie's radio obviously picked up Foster's reaction. "I suppose I'm resisting then. You are criminals with the fantasies of power, and these are my people." The sheriff's disobedience was a watershed. Individuals who had been undecided now took sides in Valle Vista. Firefighting supplies were supplied by the proprietor of the hardware store. The injured were admitted to the nearby clinic. Cartel violence greeted every act of opposition, but each act of violence just made the town more determined. Ruth said they're eavesdropping cartel communications and calling in reinforcements. El Lobo is not content. It was intended to be a straightforward act of terror. Ellie looked at the tactical display that showed the activities of the cartels throughout the town. They have fulfilled all of our requirements by committing their forces, revealing their command structure, and showcasing their strategies. Through their secure line, Frank's voice could be heard. "Ma'am, we have located the old water tower, which serves as their main communications center. They're using it to operate their whole business." "Good," Ellie said. "Continue to observe. Give them the impression that they are ahead." Ruth was already organizing with their wider network when she turned to her. "How many of us are in that position?" "There are 28 operators dispersed throughout the municipality. 12 more are prepared to move in as necessary. All cartel leaders are under our surveillance, with the exception of El Lobo. Although the fires were still burning, their intended effect had been reversed. They had strengthened Valle Vista's spirit, not broken it. The town had changed by morning. It would prove to be significantly more hazardous to El Lobo's operations than he had anticipated." Ellie stared as the sun rose over her farm, the sky tinted gray by the smoke from the town's fires. The violence of the night had been expected. In the face of opposition, cartels always used force. However, Los Espectros had disclosed an important aspect of their organization in the process. As they gathered, she told her squad that they are professional. However, they are predictable. They will fail because they adhere to established procedures and patterns. As dawn came, Sheriff Foster showed up at the property, his face covered with soot and his outfit smelling of smoke. There have been 15 injuries, no fatalities, and the fires are contained. They're not finished, though. This was only their first tactic. No, Ellie concurred. Not only are they not finished, but neither are we. She proceeded to the maps, where Ruth had annotated each cartel location, command center, and weakness they had discovered throughout the pandemonium of the night. El Lobo believes he is imparting power to Valle Vista. He's going to learn one about intelligence instead, because Ellie's network had been collecting evidence, monitoring conversations, and figuring out their organization's flaws while the Los Espectros had been spending the night showcasing their violent prowess. The aim of the following stage would be something significantly more valuable than companies or buildings. It would go right to the core of the cartel's activities. The magnitude of the cartel's attack on Valle Vista was made clear in the morning. Buildings that had burned served as glaring reminders of the carnage of the night. However, El Lobo had not expected the sense of collective defiance that had risen from the ashes. He encountered the first indications of dissension within his own organization at his makeshift command center in the deserted motel. With obvious frustration, Ramon Ortiz said, "The old woman is making us look weak. They continue to resist even after we burn half the town. We must strike harder. Set an example. Do you believe that I am incapable of destroying a town?" No shout could match the terror in El Lobo's quiet voice. "Your strategies from last night were obviously clumsy. Now, Valle Vista on Ellie's farm will be under the surveillance of all Texas law enforcement. They have been depending on that very thing." Even Sheriff Foster was unaware of the arrival of FBI agent Christopher Reed, who was disguised as a local rancher. Ellie launched a counteroffensive as soon as the agent arrived. After looking over the surveillance material Ruth's team had collected, Reed confirmed that 4 cartel lieutenants had been identified. Direct connections to operations in Mexico, financial activities, and communication patterns. "We haven't gathered as much actionable intelligence in 6 months as you have in one night." Frank's crew had traced the cartel's reaction to yesterday night's operation on the tactical display, which Ellie examined. When they feel threatened, it is routine procedure for them to consolidate their positions and move their precious assets to secure locations. Thus, Ruth said, her analyst mind seeing the wider picture, they're forming a pattern. Every defensive tactic shows something about their priorities and organizational structure. The lookouts for the cartel were blind to the minor changes that the morning brought to Valle Vista. The town's routine changed a little. Regular customers' habits changed, delivery timetables varied, and familiar locations were visited by strangers. Although each modification was little, taken as a whole, they contributed to Ellie's plan. From his concealed location next to the hardware shop, Frank reported that they have observers at every significant crossroads. However, they're not looking at the right things. Despite its devastation, Isabella's cafe became the center of the resistance, adhering to standard cartel surveillance procedures. The true information came from the kitchen, where Isabella's network of waiters collected intelligence with each coffee served, while cartel men monitored the front, presumably keeping an eye on the town's pulse. El Lobo meets with his lieutenants every morning at 9, always sits with his back to the wall, always has 4 guards within reach, and drinks black coffee with 2 sugars, according to Isabella's report via their secure channel. Ellie had been waiting for these seemingly insignificant things. She explained patterns to Agent Reed. They even affect the most skilled criminals. They are unable to assist themselves. At noon, the cartel made its next move. In the town plaza, 3 of their local informants, including Clark, a motel employee and gas station attendant, were discovered battered. A pledge of allegiance intended to deter collaboration with the resistance. However, the informants were already known a few days prior. The cartel had been fed by their meticulously regulated information. Ellie wanted them to know exactly that. Every betrayal had been planned to bolster El Lobo's suspicions about the safety of his company. Ruth pointed him that they are withdrawing their surveillance teams, monitoring the cartel's communications, combining, and attempting to find any possible leaks in their operations, which results in gaps in their coverage, Frank continued. His group was already taking action to take advantage of these gaps, setting up more monitoring gear in previously unnoticed areas. As instructed by Ellie, Sheriff Foster pretended to be overwhelmed by the circumstances. Ellie's personnel were able to walk freely via the blind spots this produced, while his deputies patrolled visibly. They had a prepared answer for every cartel countermeasure, but they were unaware that they were acting out a screenplay that had been written decades earlier. As he saw the operation, Agent Reed acknowledged, "Your people are good. This is a methodical breakdown of their operating framework, not only resistance." Ellie smiled a little to herself. Fear and brutality were the foundation of the Los Espectros empire, but they had never encountered an adversary who is knowledgeable about intelligence warfare. We have more proof with each act of violence. Every protective tactic exposes a new vulnerability. The cartel experienced their first significant loss as evening drew near. Hidden in a warehouse they believed to be secure, a shipment of weapons disappeared without a trace. Ellie's intelligence had led the FBI task force to remove it while the town was the center of the cartel's attention. El Lobo's response was expected. In order to protect their remaining assets, he ordered heightened security at all of their locations and removed men from monitoring responsibilities. Every defensive change led to fresh weaknesses that Ellie's group had foreseen and were ready to take advantage of. Frank noted the movements of the cartel's vehicles and warned that they would target the farm next. They are aware that it all began here. They will want to stand apart. Ellie said, "Let them come," with the assurance of someone W. Poe has lived a lifetime predicting what the adversary would do. There is more to the farm than just land. They aren't even aware that they are in a trap. Both sides braced for what lay ahead as twilight descended over Valle Vista. The cartel assembled its soldiers for a decisive attack, since they thought they were going to regain control. But a different kind of operation was developing in Ellie's farmhouse, surrounded by monitoring feeds and maps. "We teach them the difference between strategy and aggression tonight," she informed her crew. She looked across at Agent Reed. "Is your team prepared?" The FBI officer gave a nod. "I'm still not sure how you knew they would follow this precise pattern, but I'm on your signal." Ellie clarified, "Because men like El Lobo always do. They confuse fear for control and brutality for strength. They never discover that true strength comes from knowing your opponent so well that you can defeat them." Her remarks would turn out to be prescient that night, but not in the way the Los Espectros could have predicted. Eleanor Stewart's reputation in intelligence circles had lasted for 50 years, and the cartel was about to discover why the trap had been set. With overwhelming force, the Los Espectros attacked Ellie's farm. With their headlights off, 20 cars drove through the darkness with military accuracy as they came from various directions. Confident that this display of power would eventually shatter the elderly woman's, El Lobo himself oversaw from a command van. Opposition. Ramon Ortiz reported via their encrypted channel that all squads were in position. Her security teams are nowhere to be seen, and the farm is besieged. Ellie appeared to be by herself as she sat quietly at her kitchen table inside her farmhouse. In the main structure, the cartel's thermal imaging revealed a solitary heat signature, that of an old woman enjoying her evening tea. It was precisely what they had anticipated. Recall that El Lobo told his soldiers to take her alive. "Before we're done, I want her to see everything she's worked so hard to build fall apart." At exactly midnight, the first crew broke through a front gate. With their guns at the ready and anticipating opposition, they proceeded in a rehearsed formation. Rather, they discovered nothing except quiet. There were no former operators or security personnel, just an elderly woman's farm in the shadows. Ortiz mumbled, his instincts screaming warnings. "Something's wrong. It's too simple." El Lobo gestured him to hush. They could see their soldiers coming toward the farmhouse using their night vision equipment. The elderly woman had remained seated at her table and had not even looked up at the scores of men gathered around her house. El Lobo said, "Mrs. Stewart," and got out of his car. "I think it's time for us to have our conversation in person." Throughout the night, Ellie's voice could be heard clearly. "I've been waiting for you, Mr. Mendez, so come on in," with his best men at his sides. The cartel leader made his way to the residence. Not even the door was locked. They discovered Ellie Stewart inside, appearing amazingly unconcerned about the break-in at her house. "You've caused me a great deal of inconvenience," El Lobo said, examining the old woman with icy interest. "Because you wouldn't accept a straightforward commercial proposal. I've lost men, cargoes, and credibility." "A proposal for a business?" Ellie sipped her tea once again. "Is that what you call threatening families, destroying livelihoods, and frightening a town?" "We call it progress. As they see fit, the strong reshape the world." "No," Ellie told him. "What is important is protected by the powerful. The weak conceal their shortcomings with fear." A small fissure appeared in El Lobo's lovely exterior. "Old woman, where are your protectors? Your friends in the military? Who are your covert operators? They're right where they should be." The night was broken by the first explosion, and then two more in quick succession. They weren't from the farm, though. They were from the town's cartel command headquarters. Where the important Los Espectros facility had been, Ellie could see the orange glow of fires from her window. Finally losing his temper, El Lobo shouted, "What have you done?" "Me?" Decades of experience were reflected in Ellie's smile. "I simply kept you busy while others completed their tasks. We're dismantling your entire operation in Valle Vista right now." The radio calls came pouring in. Under the direction of Frank's operators, FBI tactical teams were targeting cartel sites around the area. The financial attacks, however, were even more destructive. In Texas, all of the Los Espectros accounts were being frozen. All front companies were made public. "Do you believe that certain account freezes and raids will deter me?" El Lobo Mendez. "I'll reconstruct, and I'll begin by using you in this wretched town as an example." Calmly, Ellie said, "Check your phone." Already, El Lobo's phone was ringing with urgent messages. Law enforcement organizations had recently received the intelligence that Ruth's team had gathered. The whole operational organization of the Los Espectros was being revealed on both sides of the border. "It's impossible," he said as he combed over the information. "These are safe places, accounts that are protected, and years of effort. Did you truly believe that I serve in intelligence for 50 years? Work that doesn't teach you how to take down criminal empires?" Ellie got to her feet gently, moving without hurry. "In Valle Vista, everything you did was recorded. Every response was anticipated. You adhered to the precise patterns we anticipated." The night was illuminated by additional blasts outside. The members of the cartel were frantically attempting to react to attacks that were coming from several angles. However, they had lost their coordination and leadership structure. As Ellie had intended, every unit was working mindlessly. With his own weapon up, El Lobo commanded, "Kill her." However, the lights in the farmhouse went out before his troops could respond. Anarchy broke out in the unexpected darkness. Frank's group, concealed in ready-made locations across the land, began their attack. Smoke grenades and flashbangs confused the cartel forces. Agent Reed came out of the old storm cellar system where his FBI tactical squad were waiting underneath to capture the bewildered shooters in the crossfire. "Federal officers," Reed's speech echoed loudly over several speakers. "The farm is encircled. Give up or face termination." El Lobo attempted to escape after learning the extent of the trap too late. But hours before, his route to safety had been blocked. There were ambush locations along every escape route. The tactical prowess of the Los Espectros was little in comparison to an operation that had been planned for 50 years. As FBI agents secured him, he told Ellie, "You don't understand. This is not just about Valle Vista. You can't imagine the power and connections I possess." Ellie corrected him, "Had connections. All of the intelligence we have collected is currently being shared with U.S. and Mexican authorities. The Los Espectros are being wiped out, not simply losing Valle Vista." As the FBI processed their inmates, dawn came up. One of the biggest cartel takedowns in Texas history had taken place on the farm. More significantly, however, Valle Vista was no longer under the cloud of fear that had been looming over it. As they saw El Lobo being carried away, Agent Reed said to Ellie, "I've been doing this for 20 years. This is unlike anything I've ever seen. You destroyed their entire organization in addition to beating them." As the sun rose over her farm, Ellie answered, "Because I understood something they didn't. The true measure of strength is not the amount of fear one can instill, but rather the amount of optimism one can preserve." Even if there was no longer a direct threat, Ellie understood they still had work to do. Other cartels would be observing, measuring, and taking note of El Lobo's mistakes even if the Los Espectros were dismantled. Although Valle Vista had gained its independence, it would need more than a tactical triumph to hold it. It would be necessary to translate a community's desperate togetherness into long-lasting strength and to turn transitory resistance into permanent protection. And Ellie Stewart realized that the hard job was only getting started as she saw her community start to come alive in the early morning light. Valle Vista was painted in shades of victory by dawn, but the unmarked cars that were silently leaving town went unnoticed by the jubilant residents. Other cartel members vanished into the countryside as FBI teams processed El Lobo and his apprehended men. bringing with them knowledge that was more valuable than drugs or weapons. Ruth, keeping an eye on their surveillance network, stated, "We have movement on the southern routes. Too well organized to be random. There are at least 12 automobiles dispersed among various escape routes." Now recovered from the pandemonium of the night, Ellie examined the data from her farmhouse command center. They're not running. Someone is directing these withdrawals, which are strategic. Fragmented signals were detected by Frank's crew, which was still keeping an eye on cartel communications, indicating that Ruth's assessment was accurate. Even though the Los Espectros were dismantled, parts of their organization were still in place and were already adjusting to the new circumstances. El Lobo has 3 important lieutenants missing. According to Agent Reed, he joined them with new information on his finance officer and his involvement with the Nuevo Leon cartel. Sheriff Foster showed up, looking worn out yet resolute. Though not necessarily in ways that made his job easier, the events of the night had changed his town. Outsiders are already relocating here, and businesses are inquiring about homes, especially ones that were damaged during the conflict. Ellie noted bitterly that vultures were circling. El Lobo created a void that the Nuevo Leon cartel will not spend time attempting to fill. The town's rehabilitation operations were temporarily commanded from Isabella's diner. Isabella observed trends in the discussions she overheard as she served coffee to both FBI personnel and residents. She told Ellie that people are afraid, not of what took place, but of what will happen next. They had good reason to be afraid. The first indications of the impending storm were seen by mid-morning. With diplomatic credentials too flawless to be real, the passengers of 3 black SUVs drove through the border crossing. The advance crew from the Nuevo Leon cartel arrives to evaluate the situation. Ruth went over their intelligence files and cautioned that they were more advanced than Los Espectros. They use reputable companies, dishonest public servants, and legal systems to carry out their operations. Their first choice is not violence. It is their final resort. Ellie studied documents taken from El Lobo's command center in her home. These are shipping manifests. Their known operations do not coincide with the dates. Something else, something significant enough to resist this difficult control, was being moved through Valle Vista by El Lobo. Activity around the border has intensified, according to Frank's squad. Our monitoring gaps are being tested by cartel scouts. They're mapping our skills in an attempt to figure out how we were able to take down Los Espectros so successfully. The town itself was evolving. Subtle changes were occurring as the obvious damage was being fixed. Local businesses saw an influx of new customers who inquired carefully about investment options and property valuations. Although each question appeared to be harmless enough, they all fit together to create a pattern. Agent Reed noted that they are collecting intelligence, testing answers, and probing. Territory is no longer the only factor at play here. They're curious about what transpired here. There was growing talk of Valle Vista in cartel conversations, which Ellie's network picked up on. Overnight, the hamlet gained renown as the site of El Lobo's empire's collapse. But that celebrity also brought with it dangerous scrutiny. Ruth said that 3 other gangs have agents coming this way to keep an eye on border crossings. Everyone wants to know how Los Espectros was brought down by a little village. One of the well-dressed men in Isabella's diner identified himself as a representative of an investment firm in Mexico. His inquiries about nearby companies appeared to be standard, but Isabella saw how his eyes followed patterns of movement and took note of the locations of security cameras. During their secure morning briefing, she informed Ellie that they were already here, carrying briefcases and business cards instead of guns. As nighttime drew near, Ellie assembled her core squad. The town's festivities were coming to an end, and in their place came a tense realization that their triumph might have drawn much more harmful attention. Pointing out possible trouble locations on their tactical map, she explained, the Nuevo Leon cartel won't make El Lobo's mistakes. Instead of using violent intimidation to gain power, they will do so gradually, legally, and through economic pressure. How can we combat that? Knowing that his legal power would not mean much in the face of corporate lawyers and business licenses, Sheriff Foster asked. Ellie responded by recognizing their true desires. There was more to El Lobo's operation than just narcotics and territory. All of these signs, the scope of their reaction, and the other cartel's quick interest all point to something more significant. Ruth's team of analysts had started assembling bits and pieces of information from El Lobo's intercepted conversations. Though it's encrypted differently than their typical traffic, there is a trend here. They took exceptional measures to conceal whatever it was they were actually doing in Valle Vista. The community appeared to be at peace once more when night fell. However, Ellie's group watched. Activity in the shadows has increased. Meetings in parking lots, documents being exchanged, and new players repositioning pieces were all captured on surveillance footage. As they watched another column of unmarked vehicles drive through town, Ellie told Frank that they believed the threat was over. We need them to think precisely that, because Stewart was already getting ready for the next stage of the battle as Valle Vista rejoiced over its freedom from Los Espectros. Ellie. This time, the Nuevo Leon cartel would not encounter an unprepared and shocked town. They would go up against a foe who had learned from their past triumphs and was prepared for a new type of conflict. She told her staff that El Lobo was only the beginning. We now discover what it was worth battling so hard to control, and we take action before our newfound pals reveal their true motivations. As the night grew darker above Valle Vista, it seemed as though one fight was coming to a conclusion and another was about to start. However, the adversary would not bring weapons and threats this time. With a different kind of weapon that might be just as destructive as any cartel brutality, they would arrive with smiles, contracts, promises, and legal documents. Buried under documents taken from El Lobo's command center, Ruth was discovered at 3 in the morning. When combined, shipping manifests, property, records, and geological surveys, all seemingly innocuous documents, told a heartbreaking tale. You must see this, Ellie. She sounded as urgent as if she had just discovered a bomb. It was never about smuggling routes or drugs. Valle Vista is sitting on something far more desirable. They had restored the farmhouse command center. Screens displaying surveillance feeds from throughout town were shown to its pre-battle organization. Ellie looked over the papers, her face growing serious as she realized what they meant. Water rights, she muttered. Half of northern Mexico may be supplied by underground aquifers. El Lobo had no intention of using drugs to take over Valle Vista. He desired the rights to water. While they were mapping the consequences, Sheriff Foster showed up. This morning, 3 more companies shut down. All of the new owners are connected to a development corporation in Mexico. Bit by bit, they're acquiring the town. They observed the Nuevo Leon cartels functioning through their surveillance network. This was a smart economic attack, not the ruthless methods of Los Espectros. The renewal of business licenses was refused. All of a sudden, health inspections became stricter. Inexplicably, bank loans were called in. From his observation station near the town square, Frank saw that they were lawfully strangling the town. Just paperwork and pressure. No threats, no violence. Isabella's diner was still operating, but her suppliers were experiencing delivery issues. The hardware store discovered that their insurance had been terminated. The local bank was also under pressure from audits. Ruth read from her study from Martinez Development Corporation, its parent business. On paper, they appear to be a legitimate company, yet their board of directors is a who's who of financial cartels. They have already done this in other towns and along the border. Ellie saw more suits arrive at town hall with briefcases containing permits and proposals. Everything is explained by the water rights. Why did El Lobo put up such a fight? Why did the cartel from Nuevo Leon advance so fast? In this area, water will be worth more than oil in 10 years. Their suspicions were validated by Agent Reed, who coordinated with the FBI financial crimes units. A shell corporation structure is being created. They will begin purchasing water rights as soon as they have sufficient control over nearby companies. On the surface, everything is completely lawful. Their plan was presented during the town council meeting that night. Expert speeches about economic growth, assurances of employment and wealth, and subliminal reminders of how challenging business has recently become. Everything was shrouded in legal documents that concealed its actual function. There are already 4 corrupted council members. Ruth said she kept track of money transfers. Even before El Lobo made his move, the cartel had been setting the foundation for months. Ellie studied the farmhouse by looking at ancient maps of the area and superimposing geological studies on top of them. The majority of the county is beneath the aquifer. You have power over Valle Vista's water rights and the destiny of the entire area. Although there was more surveillance activity, Frank's crew did not witness the military-style actions they had previously witnessed. These were professionals driving fancy automobiles, taking pictures, conducting surveys, all of which were completely legal and extremely dangerous. During their private meeting, Isabella explained that they were charting everything: water tables, ownership information, property lines, and compiling a database of the town's vulnerabilities. Throughout the day, the pressure increased. Health inspectors and tax auditors visited more firms. Assessments on properties abruptly went up. Every action was documented, lawful, and purposefully detrimental to the town's economy. Agent Reed clarified that this is the way contemporary cartels function. They've discovered that bankers and attorneys can be more successful than shooters. When your adversary is not breaking any laws, how do you defeat them? As she went through property documents dating back decades, Ellie responded. El Lobo's operation was not only about protecting water rights. He was also attempting to conceal something about them by knowing what they don't want us to know. The intricate network of front organizations and shell corporations had started to be dissected by Ruth's analysis team. Each link demonstrated the cartel's deep penetration of the local power structure while also illuminating its ultimate goal. She mentioned state regulators, county officials, and local judges. For years, they have been expanding their network of influence. Everything was nearly revealed by El Lobo's violence. Valle Vista appeared to be at peace as night fell. However, behind closed doors, families talked about selling their homes. Company owners tallied their diminishing finances, and the community's spirit started to erode due to constant economic strain. Sheriff Foster noted sourly that they don't need guns. They will acquire the town through entirely lawful means. How can we prevent that? As another group of cartel lawyers left the town hall, Ellie watched from her window. The Nuevo Leon cartel was sufficiently alarmed by what El Lobo found in those water rights to act so swiftly. Something to die for. Because Ellie Stewart was solving a mystery that extended beyond water rights and drug cartels, while Valle Vista was under a complex economic siege. A secret that may alter the balance of power along the entire border was hinted at by the town's position, the significance of the aquifer, and the haste of the cartel. She told her squad to keep observing. They're being cautious, but they're also afraid, and people who are afraid tend to make mistakes. The realization that their actual battle was only getting started came as the darkness grew darker over Valle Vista. Although the adversary no longer carried guns, their contracts and briefcases may be just as dangerous to the town's existence. The military archive that was half a century old revealed the truth about Valle Vista. Ruth discovered it by comparing historical documents, a 1962 Department of Defense assessment that identified the highest security classifications, with El Lobo's confiscated papers. She spread the declassified maps across Ellie's dining room table and emphasized that it wasn't just water. During the Cold War, the authorities discovered something more beneath Valle Vista that they wished to conceal from the Soviets. Ellie's intelligence training enabled her to recognize what others had overlooked when she studied the geological studies. Underground infrastructure, naturally occurring cave systems that have been adapted for military purposes, and backup locations in the event of a nuclear conflict. The stakes they were facing were made clear at the town council meeting that morning. The attorneys with Martinez Development Corporation made a seamless presentation of their plan, which included a full buyback of Valle Vista's water rights and substantial relocation benefits for locals. Antonio Martinez, the public spokesperson for the cartel, told the crowded council chamber that this is about protecting the future of the area and guaranteeing water security for people on both sides of the border. However, Ellie, who was observing from the rear of the room, noticed what the others had missed. Martinez was careful to steer clear of some topics in his presentation, including the particular properties his business intended to purchase first. They were tracking the shape of an old military station, not just the aquifer. During their classified briefing, Agent Reed conjectured that the cartels must have discovered the ancient archives and learned what the government had constructed down there. But after all these years, why move now? That query was answered when Sheriff Foster arrived with news. The Army Corps of Engineers informed me that they will be performing a regular survey of the area the following month. They've expressed interest in Valle Vista for the first time in 50 years. Frank's crew, which was keeping an eye on cartel communications, indicated that their operations were becoming more urgent. They're putting more pressure on people to buy real estate. They are uneasy about the government survey for whatever reason. The morning crowd at Isabella's Cafe, one of the few locally owned establishments left, was humming with gossip. The promises of relocation were too attractive for basic water rights. People began to wonder why their little village had suddenly gained such a high value. According to Ruth's analysis of satellite data, whatever's down there is worth billions to someone. To whom is the question? Ellie discovered her own history as a result of her research. She had heard rumors about covert installations along the border while working as a junior intelligence officer. Facilities constructed for purposes other than war. Something that the government, even its own citizens, had wished to conceal. The next step taken by the cartel's legal team was to file emergency licenses for environmental surveys of particular properties at noon. The 1962 military maps were a great match for their target areas. Comparing the documentation, Ellie understood they weren't looking for the old installation. They're already well aware of its location. Before the government forgets what they constructed here, they're rushing to secure it. The FBI team led by Agent Reed found further connections. The Nuevo Leon cartel had been involved in more than just real estate purchases. They had been employing specialists in particular disciplines and purchasing specialized technical equipment. Neither narcotics nor even water rights were at issue here. They were getting ready for something considerably more significant. Ruth said, "Look at these requisitions. Geologists with military clearance, sophisticated drilling equipment, and ground-penetrating radar. They intend to enter the subterranean facilities." Local businesses faced increased demand in the afternoon. Violations of the health code emerged out of nowhere. Critical safety hazards were discovered by building inspectors, necessitating costly repairs right away. The cartel's plan was straightforward: disrupt the town's economy in order to compel a large-scale real estate transaction. However, why? During their strategy session, Sheriff Foster inquired, "Why not simply purchase the particular assets they require?" Ellie clarified, "Because they have to clear the entire town. They can't risk anyone noticing their actual operation, since whatever's down there is so large." They saw the evolution of the cartel's activity through their surveillance network. Technical teams started carrying out covert surveys while posing as utility employees. Equipment was set up in warehouses just across the street. Everything suggested that the operation had been planned for years and was now moving more quickly because of the government's unexpected interest. As darkness fell, Ellie informed her crew that the Cold War had never truly ended. It simply changed shape. We now have cartels battling for secrets hidden beneath American soil rather than nations battling over ideologies. The ramifications were astounding. The balance of power along the entire border would change if the cartel gained access to whatever the government had concealed beneath Valle Vista. However, stopping them required revealing secrets that had been kept hidden for 50 years by influential people. Ruth, keeping an eye on communications, cautioned, "We're running out of time. The cartel is establishing shell corporations more quickly than we can follow them." Ellie interrupted, already formulating a plan. "We change the game once they have legal control of the property. They believe that this has to do with legal ownership and property rights. However, I didn't work in intelligence for 50 years without discovering some hidden secrets. Because the Nuevo Leon cartel had missed something important when they were battling to find abandoned military locations. It was no coincidence that Eleanor Stewart had decided to retire to Valle Vista. Certain missions never truly ceased, and certain secrets extended beyond subterranean installations. The weight of untold stories and looming conflict descended upon the village as night fell. The cartel believed they were in a race to find Cold War secrets against the government. They would soon discover that the most perilous secrets were not buried underground, but rather in the memory of those who had initially assisted in their burying. Ellie opened a concealed safe while William Stewart's old photograph rested on her desk. It included papers she hadn't looked at in decades. 1962 operation reports handwritten by her. It was her first significant intelligence operation, and the station under Valle Vista had been more than just a military endeavor. She told Ruth and Agent Reed that I had contributed to the creation of the security procedures. The facility was intended to safeguard something, not only serve as a backup position, something so important that both Cold War sides would have waged war to seize it. Valle Vista saw fresh players in the morning. Surprisingly ambiguous Department of Defense officers arrived at the sheriff's office in 3 black government SUVs. Ellie's suspicions were validated by their presence. The ancient secrets were coming to light. Sheriff Foster stated during their morning briefing that they are referring to it as a normal inspection. However, they're specifically inquiring about ground surveys, recent building, and anything that would point to digging activities. They monitored the cartel's reaction to the FBI presence using their monitoring network, while technical crews posing as utility personnel expanded their subsurface scanning operations. Legal teams expedited their property acquisitions. Frank noted from his observation point that they are becoming desperate and making blunders. Their equipment was too obviously visible on 3 of their survey crews. Such technology would never be carried by actual utility workers. More troubling trends had been found by Ruth's analysis team. The cartel is investing in particular kinds of containment devices in addition to real estate. They're getting ready to transport whatever's down there. The DoD personnel asked carefully worded inquiries about local history while trying to keep their cover in Isabella's cafe. However, what they were actually looking for was shown by their interest in particular parts of town. Ellie, observing via surveillance feeds, said they're just as terrified as the cartel. These secrets were believed to be securely buried by the government. They are now understanding that the ghosts of the Cold War never truly go away. They simply bide their time until they reappear. At midday, the cartel took their next action. Antonio Martinez summoned the town council to an emergency meeting and presented environmental data indicating that some regions needed to be evacuated due to immediate safety issues. He made a convincing case that this is about community protection. Public safety is in immediate danger due to these geological instabilities, but Ellie had been waiting for this opportunity. All eyes were on her as she stood silently in the council room. It's interesting that the 1962 military study, which is still classified, identified issues in the same areas as your studies. Martinez's well-honed poise faltered a little. Mrs. Stewart, I have no idea what you mean. Public safety is the only thing that worries us. They are, of course, Ellie said coolly. The DoD's unexpected interest in our small town is also just normal. Yes, Mr. Martinez, we all have our stories. Which ones are real, I wonder? Both sides increased their pressure in the afternoon. While cartel attorneys requested emergency injunctions to stop the government from interfering with their lawful commercial operations, DoD officials started to subtly investigate properties held by the cartel. Agent Reed warned that they would push a confrontation. To prevent the other from taking power, either side might reveal everything. Reminiscent of its creation, Ellie inspected the ancient facility designs. Despite having just partial knowledge, the cartel believes they know what's under there. The true secret is in comprehending the rationale behind certain decisions, not in any text. Cartel messages were intercepted by Ruth's team, indicating that they were getting ready for a big operation. Across the border, soldiers and equipment were being prepared, ready to proceed as soon as they gained legal access. According to Frank, they're not merely attempting to outrun the government to the location. They intend to utterly demolish it, leaving nothing behind for anyone to discover. With darkness drawing near, Valle Vista was caught in an unseen struggle. Cartel members kept an eye on the DoD officials while they set up surveillance on important properties. Both sides awaited an error on the part of the other to reveal their actual motivations. Ellie told her core staff that there was a reason why William and I picked this place. To ensure that long-buried secrets remained hidden, someone had to keep an eye on them. But now that they are coming to light, She pulled out a second file, this one with pictures dated 1962. They displayed security precautions and building specifics, but most significantly, they displayed what the government had actually constructed underneath Valle Vista. "My God," Ruth said, realizing the ramification. Ellie reassured her that if this leaks, it won't, since we won't provide it to any side. Certain secrets must remain hidden, while others must be totally erased. As night descended over Valle Vista, there was a feeling that things were speeding up to a conflict that none of them could possibly control. A community perched atop a powder keg of Cold War secrets was trapped between the cartel's ambitious plans and the government's efforts to safeguard its interests. However, Ellie Stewart had dedicated her life to safeguarding secrets of a greater magnitude. She realized that the true goal of the operation was to avert a new disaster rather than to preserve old mysteries, as she observed both sides getting ready for their next course of action. "They believe this is about the past," she informed her team, "about lost intelligence, hidden riches, or outdated weapons. However, William and I buried something much more dangerous, something that in the wrong hands could spark a war. We must now ensure that it never comes into contact with daylight." At midnight, the cartel struck using papers rather than force. They were able to start essential utility repairs in Valle Vista after emergency construction licenses were unexpectedly approved. Heavy machinery started to move into place around strategic spots that precisely matched the 1962 facility maps in a matter of hours. Frank reported from his observation point that they're no longer even attempting to conceal it. Teams, ground-penetrating radar, professional excavation, equipment I've only seen in military operations. Responding promptly, DoD officials brought federal court orders to the first dig site. However, the cartel's legal team was prepared, presenting its own environmental studies and emergency permissions that demanded prompt action. Ellie informed her squad that it was beginning as they watched the two sides battle it out via their surveillance system. However, neither of them is aware of the true stakes involved. The results of Ruth's analysis of the old facility documentation were unsettling. These containment procedures are not typical. Whatever they constructed down, there was intended to contain something that even the architects were afraid of. In the morning, Valle Vista was in disarray. While federal investigators tried to set up security perimeters, cartel excavating teams started work at 3 distinct locations. The community was split by conflicting claims to power rather than acts of violence. Stewart, Mrs. at the farm, Antonio Martinez came up to her with a strange smoothness. "You're aware of what's underneath. We can avoid a disaster with your aid. Something hazardous was buried beneath this town by the government." Ellie's reaction was measured, "and we're working to eliminate the threat." "Mr. Martinez, it's not the buried that poses a threat. It's what occurs when individuals like you attempt to hide things they don't comprehend." They saw the cartels work through their monitoring feeds. Specialized machinery was being set up, security personnel posing as private contractors were relocating, and technical teams were setting up observation posts. Agent Reed noted that they were establishing a containment zone. They're getting ready to remove and move whatever they believe is down there. However, it appeared from the DoD's reaction that their plans were different. Camouflaged military vehicles in civilian clothing, trucks with equipment intended for permanent sealing of subterranean buildings rather than excavation started to arrive. Ellie told her core group that both sides were mistaken. They believe that this has to do with weaponry, secrets, or something under their control. A warning, evidence of something the world wasn't prepared to confront, was what William and I assisted in burying. In an attempt to obtain intelligence, federal investigators and cartel lawyers cautiously observed one another at Isabella's diner, which had turned into an unofficial neutral ground. Residents of the town, who were torn between these opposing forces, started to notice odd aspects of the operation. Sheriff Foster stated that they are bringing in the equipment. Some of it appears to be medical, containment suits, and quarantine equipment. What did they bury down there exactly? Ruth's urgent call cut Ellie off mid-sentence. Not the actual facility, but proof of its size was what the cartel's initial excavation crew had discovered. A massive complex that was much greater than anything documented in the official records was discovered by ground-penetrating radar. Ruth studied the statistics and muttered, "My God, this is more than just a building. The whole city is underground." However, why? For what purpose were they getting ready? The more the cartel's dig went on, the more hostile the DOD officials grew. While military soldiers dressed in civilian clothes brought specialized equipment into position throughout the area, federal authorities started erecting roadblocks. They're not attempting to defend. Observing their deployment pattern, Ellie understood they were old secrets. They're getting ready to contain it. They believe that something will escape. There was more activity at the cartel's staging areas, according to Frank's squad. Additional equipment is being delivered, but it now includes radiation shielding and biological containment units. They were taking no chances with whatever they believed they would discover. As nightfall drew near, Ellie told her crew it was time. "We cannot allow any side to enter the building. There is neither a secret nor a weapon hidden down there. This fact has the potential to destroy the entire world." One last file, which she had kept apart from the others, she opened. Photographs that even Agent Reed's professional poise broke were inside. Pictures from 1962 that demonstrated the rationale behind the construction of the facility and the need to keep some things hidden. She assured her staff that they were both justified in feeling afraid. Regarding the answer, however, they are mistaken. We don't have to find out or stop this. We must ensure that it is never discovered, and I am quite capable of doing so. As three troops readied themselves for conflict, night fell over Valle Vista. The cartel, thinking they were in a race to discover a secret of great power. The government was desperate to keep a half-century-old error from being revealed, and Ellie Stewart's group was getting ready to put a plan into action that would guarantee the truth would always be kept secret. Because what was beneath Valle Vista was more than a buried weapon or a relic from the Cold War. Eleanor Stewart had spent 50 years ensuring that change never materialized, and this evidence pointed to something that would change everything. At dawn, the first intrusion into the subterranean complex occurred. Working through the night, the cartel's excavating crew managed to breach the outside seal of what looked like a huge blast door. A huge open area beyond was picked up by their advanced technology, but their technical specialists hesitated for some reason due to the readings. Frank reported from his observation point that they had ceased drilling. Their survey team seemed uneasy about something. Their advisors in science are being called in. Ellie's team monitored the response of DoD forces and the cartel through their surveillance network. The government's reaction to the development was prompt and illuminating. Men in unmarked hazmat suits appeared at the perimeter, and specialized containment units started to move into place. Ruth watched, keeping an eye on their equipment. The feeds. They're concerned about more than simply outdated weapons and building collapse. These are protocols for biological containment. This is being handled as though it were an outbreak. Residents of Valle Vista were confronted with the truth of their predicament in the morning. Unusual air monitoring devices started to appear all around the town. Stations, checkpoints for medical inspection, and containment areas denoted by harmless signs for construction sites. Sheriff Foster requested during their emergency meeting, "Tell me the truth, Ellie. What exactly did they bury beneath our town?" Before answering, Ellie reviewed the most recent information from the breach site. Something occurred in 1962 that altered our perspective on the world. This facility was not constructed by the government to conceal secrets or weapons. It was designed to hold questions that no one was prepared to respond to. The technical team of the cartel attempted to open the blast door for the first time at the excavation site. They scrambled back in terror when something was detected by their advanced sensors. Their own containment teams arrived in a matter of minutes and installed decontamination stations and airlocks. Ruth said that they intercepted their communications and discovered evidence of something that doesn't fit any profiles. Complete quarantine procedures are being followed. The DoD officials abandoned the charade of a regular examination. Senior authorities arrived with orders citing national security concerns, and military personnel in civilian vehicles started to form a cordon around the town. During an emergency town council meeting, the lead official said that this is now a subject of federal power. A temporary quarantine is being imposed on Valle Vista. Nobody enters or exits without permission. However, the cartel had no plans to give up their business. As they sought injunctions against government involvement, more equipment arrived via secret routes and back roads. Teams worked in enclosed spaces while the excavation proceeded under strict security. As they kept an eye on the situation, Ellie informed her core team that both sides were incorrect. They believe they have a containment problem. They are confronted with a reality that has the potential to shatter our preconceived notions. They observed how the town changed from Isabella's diner. While cartel security personnel set up their own control stations, military checkpoints were placed at significant junctions. Locals were torn between opposing authorities who all claimed to be acting in the public interest. When the cartel's team eventually broke through the inner chamber, the situation reached a critical point. A huge network of connected rooms and hallways was picked up by their sensors, but something about the arrangement went against the grain of traditional construction. Ruth analyzed the data they had intercepted and said, "These readings can't be right. There are no known construction principles that align with the internal dimensions. Since it wasn't constructed using traditional methods, it seems as though the inside area is incorrect." Ellie finished for her. What they buried here was proof of something that would alter our perception of reality itself, not just a facility. Her statements were validated by the duty's reaction to the violation. Special units with equipment not found in regular military forces started to arrive. The administration was getting ready for more than just a containment effort. Frank noticed their deployment pattern and understood they weren't trying to hold anything in. They are attempting to keep something out that they believe could be attracted to whatever is beneath there. Valle Vista was at the epicenter of a growing dilemma as dusk drew near. Rooms with odd technology and mysterious readings have been discovered during the cartel's excavation. According to the government's response, they anticipated disastrous outcomes. Ellie told her colleagues, "We're running out of time. Everything changes when they completely breach the main chamber. Before that occurs, we must put the final protocol into effect." From her safe, she took out a last set of papers, plans that William had assisted her in creating many years prior. In addition to outlining the facility's structure, they also described a backup plan that would guarantee its contents were never used. She showed them the fail-safe triggers and stressed that the truth isn't designed to be controlled or restrained. Sometimes leaving some questions unsolved is the only way to keep the planet safe. As night descended upon Valle Vista, the weight of imminent revelation descended as well. While government forces positioned themselves for decisive action, the cartel's crews prepared for their last push into the center of the facility. However, Ellie Stewart and her group were prepared. They made sure that some secrets would always be hidden beneath the Texas soil by spending decades preparing for this moment. What was actually concealed in those subterranean rooms was not the question. The question was if they could stop it from being found. Decades of stale air rushed out through the cartel's advanced filtration systems as the main room of the facility opened like a tomb before both sides let loose something they couldn't control. Wearing sealed environmental suits, their lead technical team entered an area that could not be explained. The equipment in the large room appeared to be both antiquated and incredibly sophisticated. Through their private line, the team leader stated that they were receiving readings that were illogical. "This technology? We have never seen anything like this." The DoD's reaction was surprising and swift. Rather than attempting to take over, they started working together with the cartel squads, exchanging information and pooling resources. Both sides were sufficiently alarmed by what they observed in those first readings to immediately form an alliance. "They're afraid," Ruth said, keeping an eye on their conversations. It just dawned on both parties that they are dealing with something much more than they anticipated. As more sophisticated equipment reached the scene, Ellie kept an eye on everything via their surveillance network. Their past dispute had been forgotten in the face of what they found, and the cartel and government forces had formed a joint operating command. She informed her colleagues that everything was going according to William's prediction. The building was not intended to house a hazardous material. It was constructed to conceal proof of an impossibility. The secrets of the main chamber kept coming to light. Banks of machines that appeared to be beyond the laws of physics. Language-specific documentation that did not correspond to any recognized writing system. Additionally, there was a device at the middle that the scientific teams on both sides refused to approach directly. From his observation station, Frank stated that they are identifying energy signatures that shouldn't be there. According to the scientist, it seems as though the laws of physics are altered in that chamber. Ellie's was visited by Sheriff Foster. Farm has vital news. Citing unknown environmental concerns, the joint effort was getting ready to evacuate Valle Vista. However, the kind of evacuation procedures being used made it clear that they were truly concerned. He clarified that they are handling it as if it were a pandemic. However, the medical teams that they are bringing in are not searching for illnesses. They're keeping an eye out for something else. While cartel technological teams set up monitoring stations around town, they see military soldiers establishing quarantine zones through the windows of Isabella's diner. With a shared terror, the adversaries from the previous night now coordinated their efforts. According to Ruth, the apparatus in the middle of the room was examining data that had been intercepted. These readings indicate that it is active since 1962. However, no known power source can do it. Ellie took action to carry out the next part of her strategy. Her crew started turning on equipment that had been inactive for decades, while both sides concentrated on the main chamber. The building itself is equipped with fail-safes. She told her core crew, "William and I didn't just help build this place. To make sure that some discoveries remained hidden, we built it to be destroyed if needed." At midday, the order to evacuate was issued. Residents of Valle Vista were forced to go through medical screening stations and have their belongings checked by strange devices. Government and cartel officials kept an eye out for certain responses, but none would specify what they were seeking. As Ellie observed the screening procedure, they believe exposure has already taken place. Preventing contamination is not their goal. They are searching for indications of change. The unified scientific team tried to approach the central device for the first time inside the facility. They fled in terror when their devices picked up patterns that made them ramble on about implausible readings and spatial irregularities. According to the chief scientist, that machine is not only active but also reacts to our presence as if it is conscious of us. The onset of the first physical alterations marked a turning point in the situation. Unnatural colors started to shimmer in the air at the facility door. Machines started breaking down in ways that couldn't be explained. Ruth understood that combining information from several sources is more than simply the machine. The entire facility seems to be growing more tangible, as though it was less substantial before we discovered it. Ellie recalled comparable incidents from 1962 as she observed the phenomenon grow. She told her crew that the reason they buried it was to keep it apart from our world and to conceal it from reality rather than from people. The cartel and government personnel realized the full extent of their discoveries as nightfall drew near. This was about something that questioned the very essence of life, not about weapons, secrets, or power. With real terror in his voice, the DoD commander declared, "We have to seal it. Bury it deeper than before and seal it." Ellie knew it was too late, but there are certain things that aren't intended to be found. Nothing could be prevented by just pouring concrete or locking doors. The breach had set something in motion. The facility served as a barrier between various realities rather than merely a containment building. She told her squad to be ready for the last stage. What follows will determine not only Valle Vista's destiny, but also the nature of everything we believe to be true. Something long buried started to awaken, as night fell over a community torn between worlds. Even while the government and cartel forces had banded together to combat a shared threat, they were still unaware of the true nature of the problem. The only person who knew what needed to be done was Eleanor Stewart, who had contributed to the issue 50 years prior. And she got ready to carry out a plan that had been in the works for decades while reality itself started to falter around Valle Vista. A one that would guarantee some doors never opened. Valle Vista changed in the morning in ways that no one could explain. The shadows fell in the wrong places. Buildings appeared to move farther apart when no one was staring at them. Scientists from the government and the cartels scrambled to interpret readings that defied accepted physics. Ruth said, examining data from their monitoring stations, "It's like reality itself is becoming uncertain. With every hour, the effect gets greater as it radiates outward from the facility." Knowing it was time to tell the whole truth, Ellie assembled her core team in the farmhouse. We didn't construct a facility to house something hazardous in 1962. We constructed it to conceal evidence that our world isn't as stable as we believe it to be. They observed the combined operation struggles to contain something they couldn't even accurately measure through their surveillance network. Both the government's classified technology and the cartel's advanced equipment were ineffective against a phenomenon that appeared to defy physical principles. Ellie clarified that the apparatus in the middle chamber isn't really a machine. We comprehend. It resembles a window that shouldn't be there, a place where various realities collide. When Sheriff Foster showed there, he had reports that supported her claims. People in the community were having moments of confusion, recalling things that hadn't happened yet, and seeing things that couldn't be there. Ellie went on, both sides believe they can control this. They think they can control whatever is going on if they have enough power or technology. However, some forces can only be contained. They are not intended to be controlled. For the first time, the government and cartel teams made a real attempt to get close to the core gadget. Patterns that hinted at the impossibility were picked up by the carefully protected sensors. Time moved at different speeds within the same area, and there were spaces that were seemingly bigger inside than out. Over their emergency line, the DoD commander declared, "We're losing containment. This facility is failing, regardless of the barrier it created." The odd consequences caused the residents to congregate at Isabella's cafe. Others claimed to have seen the shadows of unbuilt buildings. Others recounted recollections that appeared to originate from past incarnations. Ellie told her team that the town itself is a component of the confinement system. According to Frank's team, the street layout and building pattern were all intended to maintain the dominance of our sense of reality by producing a sort of stabilizing effect. Growing irregularities in the vicinity of the breach location. As fundamental physical constants started to change, equipment failure became commonplace. In a setting where natural laws looked discretionary, even their most seasoned operators found it difficult to remain composed. We must put the failsafe in place. While Ruth saw the effect unfold, she encouraged us to stop it before it got out of control, but Ellie was aware of the consequences. The failsafe would necessitate giving up everything inside the containment zone, including Valle Vista itself, in addition to just sealing the facility. At an emergency meeting, she informed the assembled residents, "There's something you all need to understand. The location of this settlement was not chosen at random. Everyone who was lured to this area and every family that stayed for generations is contributing to the barrier." Even the government and hardened cartel members were taken aback by the disclosure. Agents. In addition to residing above a containment facility, the town's citizens actively participated in its security system. According to Ellie, your ties to this location, your memories, and your lives spent here serve to solidify our reality and give it more substance than the competing ideas. The symptoms become more severe as night fell. Multiple shadows are cast by streetlights. Depending on the viewpoint, windows occasionally displayed other scenes, and people claimed seeing fleeting views of other versions of themselves going about their lives. The barrier was weakened by the breach, but it also gave us one chance to strengthen it permanently if we're willing to pay the price, Ellie said to her team as they got ready for what was about to happen. The government and cartel forces realized they were up against something much bigger than they had ever encountered. Their technology was subpar, their weapons were ineffective, and their comprehension of reality itself was failing. "We are unable to fight." As he watched his guys struggle with equipment that was no longer dependable, the cartel's boss acknowledged this. Whatever is going on is outside of our control. However, Eleanor Stewart had been preparing for this moment for 50 years. She and William created a failsafe that did more than just contain an abnormality. It involved choosing between two worlds. Valle Vista gathered her allies for one last briefing as her familiar world started to falter and change. The course of the following few hours would decide not only a town's destiny, but also which version of reality would endure. And Ellie Stewart was ready to carry out a plan that would necessitate sacrifices none of them had thought imaginable as the lines separating the worlds became thinner. As reality began to change all around them, the people gathered at the old church in Valle Vista. In some ways, The building's foundation seemed more stable than the shaky outer world, and it appeared to withstand the odd effects. Knowing that her next question would put their faith to the test in a manner that no sermon had ever done, Ellie stepped in front of them. She told the gathered faces that the facilities and containment were failing. However, your ties to this location, your memories, and your convictions about reality are more powerful than any barriers we might erect. Ellie had instructed them to set up a pattern of equipment around the town's perimeter, and they could see both government agents and cartel personnel cooperating through the windows of the churches. However, the townsfolk themselves would have to do the actual labor. According to Ellie, each family must select the Valley Vista memory that most vividly captures the essence of this place. Isabella was the first to realize that those memories would serve as anchors, keeping our reality steady in the face of what was attempting to invade it. When my father gave me the keys and emphasized that this place will always hold a special place in Valley Vista's heart, she said firmly the day I opened the diner. Others came after them one by one. The proprietor of the hardware store recalled his grandfather's teachings on community service. 30 years ago, the teacher recalled her very first class. Every recollection seemed to solidify the environment and solidify the air. Ruth, keeping an eye on their instruments, reported that it's working. Everywhere individuals are concentrating on their ties to the place, the reality fluctuations are leveling out. But there was a cost to the procedure. Other memories started to wane as each person dedicated himself to their anchor memory. Stability came at the cost of gradually losing less important memories, as though their minds were concentrating all of their attention on retaining. One instant is very clear. You must realize what you're giving up, Ellie cautioned them. You will lose more of your other memories the stronger you make these anchor points. You're joining the barrier itself, not simply remembering it. Similar impacts were noted by the cartel's technical staff in relation to their equipment. While some devices started to malfunction or display absurd readings, others that were in line with the townspeople's memories appeared to operate regularly. Ellie told the DoD commander that no machine can store contradictions as well as the human mind. Because of this, the town itself, rather than just the facility, was the focus of the first containment concept. Frank's group stood around the edge of Valle Vista and observed how the obvious irregularities started reacting to the anchoring procedure. Whereas regions with less emotional ties become more unstable, those with the strongest memories displayed fewer distortions of reality. Ruth tracked the effect and cautioned, "We're losing the outside margins." As people concentrate on key locations, the town's boundaries are becoming less distinct. To assist senior citizens in reaching memory-strong sites, Sheriff Foster assembled teams. In the shifting reality, each person's selection of the location where they felt most a part of Valle Vista helped create new sources of stability. Selecting his own anchor point at the station where he had been sworn in, he declared, "My entire life has been protecting this town. I had no idea that I was defending reality itself." The government agents and cartel members were also caught up in the process. Those who had visited Valle Vista started to feel the same effects, with some people's memories of the place growing more vivid and distinct while others dwindled into ambiguity. Ellie told them to concentrate on what they knew to be true. Every specific recollection makes the barrier stronger, and every uncertainty makes it weaker. The strain became apparent as darkness fell. Outside of their anchor points, people had trouble remembering things. Single moments, lifetimes of experiences distilled into particular recollections that held reality together, became the focal point of family histories. Isabella saw her own recollections of the diner sharpen and realized that we're not just choose what to remember. Which version of Valle Vista is made permanent is up to us. Ellie was aware that they were at a turning point. Although none of them had fully comprehended the cost, the anchoring procedure was effective. Every individual dedicated to maintaining the stability of reality was gradually becoming into a living foundation stone. They were more and more aware of their selected moment. As her team watched the process, she informed them there was no turning back. The individuals who hold these anchor points will never be the same after they are completely established. Although they will recall their identity, they will be defined by their association with that one ideal memory. Residents of Valle Vista clung to their selected moments throughout the long night, their mutual conviction that reality existed acting as a more powerful barrier than any physical wall. The town itself would become the anomaly's permanent jail, even though the facility below might have kept it in check for 50 years. Ellie got ready for the last stage of the containment strategy as reality settled around these human anchor points. The alternative of allowing several realities to blend together was unimaginable, but the cost was more than anyone had anticipated. On a Valle Vista that was more substantial, more authentic, but also essentially altered, the sun would rise. Its inhabitants would continue to be themselves, but each would bear the burden of using their most treasured memory to keep a fragment of reality steady. The first rays of dawn showed a Valle Vista that had been altered by the weight of choice rather than by physical change. With their selected memories blazing so brightly that other memories dimmed like stars at dawn. Each anchor holder had transformed into a living cornerstone of reality. The town's topography had changed slightly, with areas with vivid memories becoming closer together and areas between them becoming less clear. Ruth reported that the containment field is stabilizing. With her personal memories now focused on the day, she joined Ellie's crew. However, what about the anchor holders? They're evolving in unexpected ways. Years of interacting with customers blended together as Isabella stood in her diner. Every detail of her father giving her the keys retained. What they were all experiencing was validated by the cartel's technical team. Only inside the confines of these captured moments was reality solidifying. It's more than memory, Ellie told the assembled leaders. The fabric of our world is held down by each anchor point, much like a nail. However, those anchors themselves? They're starting to resemble living pictures that capture a single, flawless moment forever. They track the effect through their surveillance network. The proprietor of the hardware business could remember the location of every tool from his grandfather's day, but he had trouble recalling the births of his own children. In the classroom, 30 years of kids blended into a soft blur, and the teacher's first day was perfectly captured. Sheriff Foster recognized, "We're losing ourselves," as his own memories gathered around his swearing-in ceremony, transforming into guardians of events rather than whole individuals. Both government agents and cartel soldiers had to make their own decisions, while others found themselves growing more and more estranged from the stabilizing reality. Those who had previously spent time in Valle Vista felt the attraction of possible anchor points. "You must make a decision," Ellie informed them. "Either decide which memory to preserve, joining Valle Vista's ongoing defense, or depart before the barrier is completely established. No other opportunity will present itself." The reality distortions have changed character, according to Frank's crew. They no longer manifested as random fluctuations, but rather as static between strong radio signals in the gaps between anchor points. Ruth pointed out holes in their containment map and cautioned that the coverage was incomplete. Every individual who pushes forward runs the risk of losing most of who they are, but we need more anchors in strategic places. The town clerk was unable to recollect his own marriage, but he could recall 50 years of marriages in the church, which is now a stronghold of crystallized memory. As their personalities streamlined around their selected moments, the sacrifice made by each anchor holder became increasingly clear. As she observed the procedure, Ellie disclosed that this was always the true containment strategy. Not the building or the equipment, but the people who were prepared to sacrifice everything for a single, ideal memory, resulting in a panorama of moments so genuine that nothing else could penetrate. Finally understanding, the DoD commander made his decision. His boyhood road trip recollection of first finding Valle Vista served as his focal point. And as that one moment became crystal clear, his military career faded into the background. Following, more government officers and cartel members selected a memory that linked them to the town. With their training reducing to a simple comprehension of what they observed, technical specialists became living indicators of the solidity of reality. As darkness drew near once more, Ellie informed her core team that William was aware. He was aware that this kind of sacrifice will eventually be necessary to contain the oddity. He picked Valle Vista because he believed that its residents had a unique work ethic that could practically keep the world together. The anchor bearers' tension became increasingly apparent. In essence, they were still themselves, but in simpler forms, their personalities condensed around the memories they had selected, like brandy in its most basic form. Ruth remarked, "Look at the readings," as her own recollections became more and more centered on data analysis. The barrier is becoming stronger rather than merely holding. A network of complete certainty is being created as each anchor point influences the ones that are close to it. However, there were still holes in their reporting, crucial areas where reality faltered and threatened to allow other viewpoints to seep in. And Ellie knew they were getting close to the moment she had been preparing for since 1962 as night descended over the changed town. She informed her colleagues that one more anchor point was required, the most crucial one. All of this was made possible by the memory that began it all. Because Eleanor Stewart had been bearing the burden of the final anchor for 50 years, while the people of Valle Vista had given up parts of themselves to keep reality solid. A memory so strong that it could break down the barrier, but at a price that even she had not yet completely realized. The town held its breath, tethered between areas where reality still rippled like water and moments as solid as photos. The final stage would necessitate the greatest sacrifice of all, but the confinement was nearly finished. Ellie Stewart was ready to give up everything, but the one memory that could save not just Valle Vista, but also the essence of reality itself, as stars emerged in a sky that at last remained in one spot. Eleanor Stewart stood in her farmhouse study in the growing darkness, surrounded by the life she had created over the last 50 years. With the exception of one flawless memory that would complete the barrier surrounding Valle Vista, she would have to let go of all the pictures, records, and artifacts that represented her past. She explained to Ruth and Frank, her closest comrades now shackled to their own crystallized memories, that the last anchor point must be the strongest. It was the moment that made all other moments possible, not simply a single moment in time. They observed the network of anchor points pulse like a living organism through their monitoring apparatus. In a sea of possibilities, each holder had transformed into a ray of unwavering certainty, their selected memories forming islands of unalterable reality. Ruth observed that her awareness is now completely tuned to patterns of stability, and that the gaps are closing. However, the biggest one is still there, at the exact location where the facility breach started. Something strong enough to permanently seal it is required. When Isabella came home from the diner, she was still conscious enough to know what was about to happen, but her whole self was now focused on that one moment with her father. "Have you not known which memory you would use all along?" Ellie went to the safe behind William's picture and verified that it had been since 1962. "Every decision we've made since the day we realized what we were truly containing here has led us to this point. The remaining government agents and cartel forces had already made their choices. Others who remained had chosen their memories and embraced the change they brought, while others who were unable to commit to an anchor point had retreated past the barrier that was building." As she took one more file out of the safe, Ellie added, "The facility was never meant to last forever. It was only intended to keep things together until enough people could get together and form enough relationships to build something more robust than steel and concrete." The reality distortions had escalated to a critical level, according to Frank's staff. Although the distances between anchor sites had leveled off, the breach site was still teeming with potential, which might destroy all of their hard work. "Show them what William and I found that made all this necessary," Ellie told Ruth. Ruth turned on a locked terminal that showed 1962 video. The photographs depicted a younger Ellie and William recording an impossibility, a location where different realities coexisted and the laws of physics themselves were subject to negotiation. Ellie clarified, "We didn't construct the facility to house something hazardous. We constructed it to allow time to comprehend what was actually taking place and to come to the realization that reality isn't as stable as we believe it to be, and that people must believe in it, remember it, and keep it in place." The video went on, revealing discoveries and experiments that were inexplicable, but more significantly, It captured Ellie and William's realization that they needed to build a settlement that would act as a permanent anchor for reality itself. Ellie informed them that Valle Vista wasn't built here by accident. You are all selected because you have the aptitude for this kind of dedication, the ability to cling to a memory so tightly that it could aid in stabilizing life itself, regardless if it was pulled here or whether a family established roots. As Ellie got ready for her last job, the night grew darker. The town's anchor points pulsed more forcefully, their holders now totally dedicated to their selected moments. But the breach site remained shaky, awaiting the memory strong enough to finish the barrier. As she gathered the final bits of information regarding that pivotal day in 1962, she underlined that it must be flawless. Not merely a recollection, but a moment so genuine and certain that it can act as the foundation for everything else. They watched as reality itself appeared to hold its breath through their surveillance network. A moment of exquisite clarity was preserved as the anchor bearers around Valle Vista continued their vigil, each one acting as a living portrait. Ruth finally saw the pattern and knew that was the moment you made your choice. The choice you and William made is more important than the facility or the abnormality. Ellie touched her husband's picture one more time and nodded. The day that we decided to devote our lives to defending reality itself, to constructing a town that would be humanity's fulcrum in a universe more precarious than anyone realizes. Eleanor Stewart was getting ready to join the pattern they had made as midnight drew near. Her awareness and feeling of purpose would remain intact, but all other memories and experiences, aside from that one ideal moment, would gradually disappear. The alternative seemed unimaginable, but the cost was huge. The fundamental essence of life would become ambiguous, pliable, and untrustworthy in the absence of the barrier and these human anchors that keep reality steady. A place where special moments blazed so brightly that they could hold the world itself in correct alignment. Valle Vista had evolved from a town to humanity's core memory. As Eleanor Stewart stood at the breach site, surrounded by the glistening air where reality still faltered, midnight fell in Valle Vista. The network of anchor holds kept watch around her, each one blazing with their own memory of choice, weaving a web of unwavering certainty that was just waiting for its last link. She told Ruth and Frank that it was time, and they stood with her in spite of their own changes. It all boils down to this point, all we've built and done. They observed the anchor point pattern pulse through their monitoring equipment, resembling a constellation sketched on the ground. The school teacher in her classroom, the hardware store owner at his counter, and Isabella in her diner. All of them held their flawless memories like a torch against the darkness of doubt. Ruth stated that her mind is now completely tuned to the patterns of stability, and that the breach is responding. Reality itself seems to be anticipating the last recollection. Ellie pulled William's picture out of her pocket and gave it a final touch before putting it away. A single, flawless moment of memory was going to encompass everything she had been and done over the course of 95 years. She started, August 15th, 1962, her voice calm as she concentrated on that important day. Here, William and I watched as reality itself shook like water. At that point, we realized that we needed to do more than simply contain the abnormality. We needed to develop something long-lasting to stabilize existence. The strength of that memory caused the air around her to alter. Drawn by the utter surety of her memory, the remaining cartel members and government officers stared in wonder as the faltering reality appeared to bend toward her. She went on, "We saw other versions of ourselves that day, the memory growing stronger as other memories faded. We realized that reality requires anchoring because versions that had taken different decisions had lived different lives. The universe can be held in right alignment by moments that are so certain and flawlessly preserved." According to Frank's crew, the reality distortions were becoming less menacing and more entrenched in a pattern that revolved around Ellie's position. Like a lodestone, the memory she possessed was drawing in and arranging the disorderly energies of the breach. Ellie, her voice becoming more forceful as she concentrated just on that one ideal moment, stated that the facility was never intended to last. It was only a stopgap while we created something more robust, a group of individuals who could use the force of unwavering certainty to keep reality together. Just as the other anchor bearers had been reduced to the essence of their selected moments, Eleanor Stewart's transformation became apparent. That one pivotal moment in 1962 became her entire world, erasing decades of experience and memory. She remarked, her gaze fixed on something that only she could see. "I can see it so clearly." The instant we decided to devote our lives to creating a human foundation that would be sufficient to hold existence itself in place. The moment we realized what reality truly was and what it required to stay stable. Reality itself appeared to bend as the breached sight reacted to her words, the shaky air seeming to stabilize. The force of a memory that has been flawlessly kept for 50 years, waiting for this precise moment, is evident all around her. Take a look at the data. Ruth Garst is keeping an eye on the barrier and the effect. This version of reality is becoming permanent rather than merely sealing the gap. The other anchor bearers in Valle Vista saw the shift. Their own recollections became more solid and certain as Ellie's ideal moment linked with theirs, weaving a web of unwavering belief that even reality was unable to deny. Now completely engrossed in that vital memory, Ellie added, "This is what William and I witnessed, the ability of human certainty to mold reality itself, the capacity of perfect memory to keep existence steady against all the forces that would make it uncertain." Eleanor Stewart, who had spent 50 years preparing for this moment, became the keystone in humanity's defense against chaos as the final metamorphosis took effect as midnight passed. The memory of that day in 1962 burned so brightly that it overshadowed everything else and became her entire universe. The town was transformed from a place to a living mechanism, a human engine built to maintain reality itself by the strength of recorded memory. As Valle Vista gradually changed, its landscape precisely matching the pattern of anchor points. At the center of it all stood Eleanor Stewart, who now and forever held the moment that made all other moments possible. The remaining cartel forces and government agent. TS witnessed something that few humans ever would. The moment when reality itself chose its final form, anchored by the absolute certainty of memories preserved perfectly against time and change. It was the moment when two people looked into the chaos of infinite possibility and decided to build something permanent instead. The barrier was complete, the abnormality contained by the indisputable certainty of human memory rather than by walls or machinery. Valle Vista was now what it had always been, the fulcrum of humanity in a world more precarious than anyone had imagined. The town had transformed into something special in the world, a place where some moments blazed brightly forever, preserved in perfect preservation by those who had decided to become living anchors of reality itself. Dawn broke over a Valle Vista that would never change again. The hardware store's shelves remained stocked, each tool somehow symbolizing the day its owner learned his grandfather's lessons about community. And Isabella's diner continued to serve coffee, but now every cup poured was somehow linked to that ideal moment when her father gave her the keys. Ruth said that her own consciousness is now fully tuned to patterns of stability, indicating that the containment is absolute. Nothing from outside our reality will ever be able to penetrate this barrier because the anchor points have permanently established it. Knowing their part in this drama was finished, the remaining government agents and cartel forces got ready to go. They would provide reports that spoke only of failed operations and abandoned facilities, mentioning nothing of the actual character of reality. As he watched the soldiers pack their gear, the DoD commander observed that no one would believe the truth anyway. Places like this, communities of people who are ready to cling to their moments so tightly that existence itself can't help but remain constant, are necessary for reality itself. They observe the community acclimating to its new permanent status via their surveillance network, with their selected memories blazing brightly enough to highlight the gaps between possibility and certainty. Each anchor bearer had found their position in the pattern. Frank noted during his last patrol that they are not trapped. They are still enjoying their lives and being themselves. They simply capture their moments more skillfully than anyone else could. Even though the teacher continued to instruct her classes, each lesson in some way mirrored the absolute assurance of her first day. The town clerk continued to keep records, but each one was somehow linked to his vivid recollection of 50 years of marriages. And in the middle of it all, standing in her farmhouse study, Eleanor Stewart held that pivotal moment from 1962 in her heart forever. The moment she and William realized that reality required human hearts that were prepared to firmly grasp their truths, not barriers or robots. She told those who came to bid her farewell that the facility below us no longer matters. This, a community of individuals whose commitment to their moments might produce something permanent in an ephemeral universe, was always intended to be the true containment. Although inconspicuous, Valle Vista underwent a complete makeover. In a world of changing possibilities, visitors would still arrive and see what appeared to be a typical town, but they would depart with an odd sensation of certainty, as though they had touched something timeless. Serving coffee in her constant diner, Isabella learned that we are more than just preserving memories. By doing this, we're providing reality with a base upon which to grow. The proprietor of the hardware store continued to assist customers in locating tools. Even though each session carried the weight of 30 years of teaching, condensed into one ideal day, the school teacher's students nevertheless learned from every contact, which in some ways reflected his ideal moment of comprehending community service. Valle Vista adapted to its eternal position when the last external forces left. Each anchor holder would keep their ideal moment like a candle against the darkness of uncertainty as they carried on with their lives, simplified but not diminished. As Ruth and Frank completed their last inspections, Ellie informed them that this is what we had created. Not merely a wall separating us from other worlds, but a human basis for life itself. A location where those who are willing to hold on to certainty reside in their hearts. The settlement would continue, unaltered but always alive. The cost had been high, the loss of other memories, the simplification of complicated lives, but the alternative had been unimaginable. Each anchor holder maintained their flawless memory, weaving a web of unwavering conviction that reality itself could not ignore. Because Valle Vista had become the fulcrum of humanity in a universe where reality itself had proven to be brittle. A place where special moments were so blazing that life itself had no choice but to be true, steady, and permanent. At its core, Eleanor Stewart will always cherish that pivotal event in 1962. The moment when two individuals decided to construct something timeless rather than ponder the chaos of endless possibilities. An instance so flawlessly captured that it might be the cornerstone of humanity's strongest protection against uncertainty. One last time, the sun rose on something immortal and set on Valle Vista as a typical town. A place where the strength of flawless remembering held the very fabric of existence together, where memory and reality had fused into one, and where some moments would shine brightly forever. Ultimately, Valle Vista was no longer just a town. It had come to symbolize the human commitment to memory and the realization that sometimes the greatest strength is not in altering the world, but rather in clinging to those flawless moments that enable all other moments. Two more amazing tales await you directly on your screen in the next section. You won't want to miss this if you like the last one. To watch, simply click. Remember to subscribe as well. A lot would be at stake.
Disclaimer. This channel stands against all forms of intolerance, discrimination, racism, and violations of human rights. The stories shared here are original creations, developed to encourage reflection, understanding, and constructive dialogue. All content is produced with a commitment to respecting diversity and honoring human dignity.